The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Denver International Airport as Flight 847 prepared for departure to Los Angeles. Sarah Martinez adjusted her flight attendant uniform one final time, checking her reflection in the small mirror of the crew preparation room. At 34, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that most passengers would attribute to years of experience in customer service. They would be wrong about the source of that confidence. The Boeing 737 was nearly full with 186 passengers, a typical Tuesday morning crowd of business travelers, families heading to California for vacation, and a few nervous first-time flyers. Sarah moved through the cabin with practiced ease, helping passengers stow their carry-on luggage and explaining safety procedures to those who seemed confused by the overhead compartments. "Excuse me, miss," called an elderly woman in seat 12A. "Could you help me with this bag? It's heavier than I thought it would be." Sarah smiled warmly and effortlessly lifted the woman's suitcase into the overhead bin. The elderly passenger looked surprised at how easily Sarah handled the weight, but Sarah just nodded and continued down the aisle. She had learned long ago to modulate her strength, to appear helpful, but not suspiciously capable. In the galley, Sarah's colleague Jennifer was organizing the beverage cart for the flight. "Busy morning," Jennifer commented, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "Did you see those guys in first class? They've been acting strange since they boarded." Sarah glanced toward the front of the aircraft where three men in their 20s sat in seats 2A, 2B, and 3A. They wore casual clothing, jeans, sneakers, and pullover hoodies, but something about their posture caught her attention. They sat too straight, their eyes scanning the cabin too frequently, and they barely spoke to each other despite clearly traveling together. "Strange how?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice casual while she arranged safety demonstration cards. "That they didn't want help with their bags, wouldn't make eye contact, and one of them keeps checking his watch every few minutes. Plus, they paid cash for first-class tickets. Who does that anymore?" Sarah filed this information away without appearing concerned. During her 8 years as a Navy SEAL, she had learned to trust her instinct about people, and right now those instincts were sending up quiet warning signals. But she also knew that sometimes nervous flyers exhibited odd behavior, and she didn't want to jump to conclusions. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom from the cockpit. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure. We're cleared for takeoff in 15 minutes. Sarah and Jennifer completed their final safety checks, ensuring all passengers were seated with their seatbelts fastened and tray tables in the upright position. As Sarah walked through the cabin, she made mental notes about the passengers. The family in row 8 with 2 young children. The businessman in 15C who was already asleep. The college student in 22F wearing headphones and staring out the window. And the 3 men in first class who were now whispering to each other in what sounded like Arabic. Sarah spoke conversational Arabic, along with Farsi and Pashto, languages that had served her well during her deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. She caught fragments of their conversation, something about timing, about waiting for the right moment, and about the plan proceeding as discussed. Her training kicked in automatically. She maintained her pleasant flight attendant demeanor while positioning herself to observe them more carefully. One of the men, the one in seat 2A with dark hair and intense brown eyes, seemed to be the leader. He kept glancing at his watch and then toward the cockpit door. The aircraft began to taxi toward the runway, and Sarah took her position for the safety demonstration. As she went through the familiar motions of showing passengers how to use their seat belts and locate the nearest exit, her mind was racing through possibilities. Were these men simply nervous flyers speaking in their native language? Were they discussing something completely innocent that her limited Arabic was misinterpreting? Or is this something more serious? As Flight 847 lifted off from Denver, climbing steadily into the clear morning sky, Sarah made a decision. She would watch these 3 passengers carefully without alerting them to her suspicions. If they were innocent, no harm would be done. If they weren't innocent, she would be ready. 20 minutes into the flight, as the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet and the seatbelt sign was turned off, Sarah was serving beverages to passengers in the main cabin when she heard Jennifer's voice from the galley, sharp with sudden fear. "Sarah, come here. Now!" Sarah immediately moved toward the front of the aircraft, her senses on high alert. As she rounded the corner into the galley area, she saw Jennifer backing away from the three men from first class, her face pale with terror. The man from seat 2 was standing directly in front of the cockpit door, and in his right hand was a knife that gleamed under the cabin lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man called out loudly, his accent thick but his English clear, "please remain seated and keep your hands where we can see them. This aircraft is now under our control." The second man moved to block the aisle leading to the main cabin, while the third positioned himself near the emergency exit over the wing. Passengers began to gasp and whisper, some starting to panic as they realized what was happening. The leader pointed the knife at Sarah. "Come here. Now." Sarah's military training took over instantly, but she forced herself to appear frightened and compliant. She walked slowly toward the man, her hands visibly empty, while her mind rapidly assessed the situation. 3 hijackers, at least 1 weapon visible, unknown if they had other weapons or accomplices. The cockpit door was locked and reinforced post 9/11 security measures that would work in their favor. But these men had clearly planned for that. "Open the cockpit door," the leader demanded, pressing the knife closer to Sarah's throat. "You have the key." "I don't have a key," Sarah said, allowing her voice to shake slightly. "Only the pilots can open it from inside, or if they use the emergency code from out here." This was partially true. Flight attendants could access the cockpit in emergencies, but the process took time and could be overridden from inside the cockpit. The hijacker's eyes narrowed with frustration. He barked something in Arabic to his companions, and Sarah caught enough to understand he was angry that their intelligence had been incomplete. They had expected the flight attendants to have immediate access to the cockpit. "Then you'll make them open it," he said, grabbing Sarah by the arm. "Tell them to open the door, or we start killing passengers." Sarah looked past the hijacker toward the main cabin, where 180 terrified passengers were watching this confrontation unfold. Children were crying, adults were whispering prayers, and several people were attempting to make phone calls despite the leader's earlier command to keep their hands visible. "Please," Sarah said, maintaining her frightened flight attendant persona, "don't hurt anyone. I'll try to contact the pilots." She moved toward the intercom system, but the hijacker grabbed her wrist roughly. "Notrix, you speak where we can hear everything you say." Sarah nodded and picked up the phone that connected directly to the cockpit. It rang twice before Captain Rodriguez answered. "Sarah, what's happening out there?" "We heard shouting." "Captain," Sarah said carefully, knowing that her choice of words would communicate everything to the experienced pilot. "We have 3 passengers up here who are very upset about the flight service. They're demanding to speak with you directly, and they're making threats about what will happen if you don't come out to address their concerns personally." There was a pause on the other end. Captain Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran who had been through extensive security training. He would understand immediately what very upset passengers making threats meant in the current context. "Sarah, are you and Jennifer safe?" "For now, but these passengers are very impatient." "Understood." "Sarah, you know we cannot open this door under any circumstances. We're going to contact air traffic control and request priority landing. Keep everyone calm if you can." The hijacker leader had been listening intently to this conversation. When Sarah hung up the phone, he grabbed her by the shoulder and shook her roughly. "What did he say? Why won't he open the door?" "He said it's against airline policy," Sarah replied. "The door can only be opened from the inside as a security measure." The hijacker cursed in Arabic and turned to his companions. Sarah caught fragments of their rapid conversation. They were discussing whether to proceed with their backup plan, something about the device, and whether 30 minutes would be enough time. Device. Sarah's blood ran cold as the implications hit her. These weren't hijackers planning to fly the plane somewhere else. They were planning to destroy it, possibly over a populated area. And they had some kind of explosive device on board. The leader turned back to Sarah with renewed determination. "You will help us, or people will die. Starting with you." He raised the knife toward her throat again, but this time Sarah was ready. In one fluid motion, she grabbed his wrist, twisted it sharply to the right while stepping to the left, and drove her knee upward into his solar plexus. The knife clattered to the floor as the man doubled over, gasping for breath. The other passengers erupted in screams and shouts as Sarah's true nature was revealed. But she was far from finished. The second hijacker rushed toward her from his position near the aisle, but Sarah was already moving. She pivoted on her left foot, grabbed the man's outstretched arm, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into the galley counter. His head struck the metal edge with a sickening crack, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The third hijacker, realizing that their carefully planned operation had just fallen apart, abandoned his position near the emergency exit and charged toward Sarah while reaching into his jacket. Sarah saw the outline of what looked like a pistol and knew she had perhaps 2 seconds before he could draw it. She launched herself forward, tackling the man around the waist and driving him backward into the row of first-class seats. They crashed together into seat 3B, with Sarah on top. The hijacker struggled to reach his weapon, but Sarah grabbed his wrist and slammed it repeatedly against the armrest until he released whatever he had been trying to draw. "Jennifer," Sarah called out while maintaining her hold on the third hijacker. "Get their weapons and check them for other devices." Jennifer, who had been frozen with shock during the entire confrontation, suddenly snapped into action. She grabbed the knife from where it had fallen and began searching the unconscious second hijacker. From his jacket, she pulled out a small black pistol and what looked like a cell phone attached to several wires. "Sarah, this looks like some kind of remote device." The first hijacker, still gasping from Sarah's knee strike, was attempting to crawl toward the cockpit door. Sarah released the third man, who appeared to be unconscious, and quickly moved to restrain the leader. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice no longer that of a frightened flight attendant, but of a military officer accustomed to being obeyed. "You're going to tell me what your plan was, and whether there are any explosives on this aircraft." The hijacker glared up at her with a mixture of pain and defiance. "You have no idea what you've done. The plan will proceed with or without us." "What plan?" Sarah demanded, but the man had lapsed into Arabic, speaking rapidly under his breath. She caught references to the brothers in Los Angeles, and the target will be achieved. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. If there were accomplices in Los Angeles, and if this aircraft was meant to be used as a weapon against a target there, then landing at LAX might be exactly what the terrorists wanted. She needed to contact the cockpit immediately and relay this information to Captain Rodriguez. But first, she had to secure all 3 hijackers and search for any other weapons or devices they might have brought aboard. "Jennifer, I need you to help me restrain these men. Use the plastic restraints from the emergency kit, and then help me search them thoroughly." As Jennifer moved to follow these instructions, Sarah called out to the passengers in the main cabin, who were still in various states of shock and panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, the immediate threat has been neutralized. Please remain seated and stay calm while we secure the situation. If anyone has medical training, we could use your assistance up here." A middle-aged man in seat 14B stood up and identified himself as Dr. Williams. "I'm a trauma surgeon. How can I help? Please check these 3 men for injuries and monitor them while we search for additional threats." "Dr." Williams moved forward and began examining the unconscious second hijacker, whose head injury from the galley counter appeared to be serious but not life-threatening. Sarah used the cockpit phone again. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Sarah. The situation is under control, but we have new information. These weren't traditional hijackers. They appear to be part of a larger plot involving Los Angeles. I recommend we do not land at LAX as scheduled. Copy that, Sarah. We're already in contact with NORAD and the FBI. They're directing us to land at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. We should be on the ground there in 45 minutes. Are you injured? Negative, Captain. No injuries to crew or passengers. But, sir, we found what appears to be a remote detonation device. I need to search the aircraft for explosives. There was a longer pause this time. Sarah, that's outside your training. Just secure the device and wait for the bomb squad when we land. Sarah almost smiled at that comment. Captain Rodriguez had no idea that explosive ordnance disposal had been one of her specialties during her SEAL career. Understood, Captain. We'll maintain security until landing. Over the next 30 minutes, as Flight 847 was escorted by two F-16 fighter jets toward Nellis Air Force Base, Sarah conducted a systematic search of the aircraft. She found the main explosive device hidden in the overhead compartment above row 4. A sophisticated bomb with enough plastic explosive to destroy the aircraft and anyone unlucky enough to be below it when it detonated. But, as Sarah carefully examined the device, she realized something that made her blood run cold. The bomb was on a timer, not just a remote detonator. And, according to the digital display, it was set to explode in 18 minutes, well before they could reach Nellis Air Force Base. The terrorists had planned this as a suicide mission from the beginning. They had never intended to survive the flight, and they had been prepared to die along with everyone on board to achieve their goal of crashing a loaded passenger aircraft into whatever target awaited them in Los Angeles. Now Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her life. She could attempt to disarm the bomb using her EOD training, but if she made a mistake, everyone on board would die instantly. Or she could leave it alone and hope that 18 minutes would somehow be enough time to land safely, knowing that was mathematically impossible given their current distance from the airfield. As Sarah stared at the bomb's timer counting down, 17 minutes, 32 seconds, she realized that 186 innocent lives were depending on skills she had learned in the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of Iraq. Skills she had hoped never to use again after leaving the military. But sometimes, Sarah reflected as she began the delicate process of identifying the bomb's triggering mechanism. You don't get to choose when your past catches up with you. Sometimes, the skills that defined your former life are exactly what's needed to save your current one. 16 minutes, 48 seconds. Sarah took a deep breath and began to work. Sarah's hands moved with deliberate precision as she examined the explosive device. 15 minutes and 37 seconds remained on the timer, and each second that ticked away brought 186 souls closer to death. The device was more sophisticated than anything she had encountered during her military service, a fact that both impressed and terrified her. The bomb consisted of approximately 2 pounds of C4 plastic explosive wrapped around a central core that contained what appeared to be ball bearings and metal fragments. This wasn't just meant to destroy the aircraft. It was designed to maximize casualties and damage to whatever target lay below when it detonated. The timer was connected to the explosive through a series of colored wires: red, blue, yellow, green, and black, that disappeared into the main housing. Sarah, Jennifer whispered, having approached quietly to see what was happening. Oh my God, is that really a bomb? Yes, and it's going to explode in 15 minutes unless I can disarm it, Sarah replied without taking her eyes off the device. I need you to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you to do it. Can you handle that? Jennifer nodded, though her face had gone pale again. What do you need me to do? First, go to the cockpit and tell Captain Rodriguez that we have an active explosive device with a 15-minute timer. Tell him I'm attempting to disarm it, but he should prepare for emergency evacuation procedures the moment we touch down. Then come back here and help me. As Jennifer hurried toward the cockpit, Sarah continued her analysis of the bomb. The device had been expertly constructed, with multiple fail-safes designed to prevent exactly what she was attempting to do. If she cut the wrong wire or triggered the wrong sensor, the bomb would detonate immediately. But Sarah had one advantage the terrorists hadn't counted on: During her final year with the SEALs, she had worked extensively with an FBI task force that specialized in international terrorism. She had seen similar devices before, built by the same bomb-making networks that supplied explosives to terrorist organizations across the Middle East and Central Asia. The key was identifying the primary trigger wire versus the decoy wires. Terrorist bomb makers had become increasingly sophisticated in their attempts to thwart disposal efforts, often including wires that served no purpose except to confuse anyone trying to disarm the device. 14 minutes, 12 seconds. Sarah carefully traced each wire from the timer to the explosive housing, looking for the telltale signs that would indicate which connections were genuine and which were red herrings. The red wire led directly to the primary detonator. That one was obviously meant to be avoided. The blue wire appeared to connect to a secondary timer, possibly a backup detonation system. The yellow wire was thicker than the others and seemed to carry the main electrical current from the timer to the explosive charge. But it was the black wire that concerned her most. It disappeared into the housing in a way that suggested it might be connected to an anti-tampering device. If someone attempted to move or disarm the bomb, the black wire could trigger immediate detonation. Jennifer returned from the cockpit, her face grim. "Captain Rodriguez says the Air Force is scrambling additional fighters to escort us, and the bomb squad at Nellis is standing by. But, Sarah, he also said that even at maximum speed, we're still 12 minutes away from the base. 12 minutes to landing, 13 minutes, and 48 seconds until detonation." Sarah had less than 2 minutes of safety margin, and that was assuming she could disarm the bomb on her first attempt. "Jennifer, I needed to go back to the passenger cabin and quietly ask if anyone on board has experience with electronics or engineering. Don't tell them why, just say we need technical assistance with a mechanical problem." While Jennifer went to check with the passengers, Sarah continued her examination of the device. She noticed that the timer housing had several small screws that could potentially be removed to access the internal wiring. But opening the housing might trigger the anti-tampering mechanism. A tall man with graying hair approached from the main cabin, following Jennifer. "Ma'am, I'm David Chun, electrical engineer with Boeing. Jennifer said you needed technical help. Is there something wrong with the aircraft systems?" Sarah looked up at David and made a quick decision. "David, what I'm about to show you is classified information that cannot leave this aircraft. Do you understand?" David nodded, confusion evident on his face. Sarah stepped aside so he could see the bomb. "I need your opinion on this device. I have some training in explosives, but I could use another set of eyes." David's face went white as he realized what he was looking at. "Jesus Christ. How long do we have?" 12 minutes, 51 seconds. David knelt down beside Sarah and began examining the device with the trained eye of someone who understood complex electrical systems. After a minute of careful observation, he pointed to the yellow wire. "This is the main power feed from the timer to the detonation system," he said. "But look at this." He indicated a small component near where the yellow wire entered the housing. "That's a current sensor. If you cut the yellow wire, it'll detect the break in current flow and trigger the backup detonation system through the blue wire." Sarah nodded grimly. She had suspected as much, but it was helpful to have confirmation from someone with David's expertise. "What about the black wire?" she asked. David traced the black wire carefully with his finger, following it to where it connected to a small metal plate on the side of the housing. "Anti-tampering device, definitely. If the bomb is moved, or if this housing is opened, it'll complete a circuit and detonate immediately. So cutting wires is out, and opening the housing is out," Sarah summarized. "What does that leave us?" David was quiet for a moment, studying the device from different angles. Then, his face brightened slightly. "The timer itself. Look at this." He pointed to the digital display showing the countdown. "This is a commercial timer, probably purchased at an electronics store. It's designed to control electrical devices, but it's not military grade. If we could somehow disrupt the timer's internal clock without cutting any of the external wires, we might be able to freeze the countdown." "Ow!" "Electromagnetic pulse. A strong enough electrical current applied directly to the timer housing could scramble its internal circuits without triggering the detonation sensors. Sarah considered this option. It was risky. If the electromagnetic pulse was too strong, it might trigger the explosive. If it was too weak, it would have no effect, and they would only get one chance. What would we need to generate an electromagnetic pulse? David looked around the galley area, his engineer's mind cataloging the available resources. The aircraft's electrical systems. If we could tap into the main power bus and create a directed electrical discharge. Jennifer, do you know where the main electrical panel is located in the galley? Jennifer nodded and led them to a panel near the rear of the galley area. David opened it and examined the array of circuit breakers and electrical connections inside. This could work, he said. I can redirect power from main bus through the aircraft communication antenna array. If we can position the timer near the antenna mount point and discharge the system, it should create enough electromagnetic interference to disrupt the timer. 10 minutes, 18 seconds. Do it, Sarah said. I'll prepare to move the bomb. Sarah, wait, David said urgently. Moving the bomb will trigger the anti-tampering device. You can't relocate it. Sarah studied the position of the bomb in the overhead compartment and the location of the nearest antenna mount, which was about 6 feet away in the ceiling above the galley. The distance was too great for an effective electromagnetic pulse. Then we bring the electromagnetic pulse to the bomb, she said. David, how long would it take you to remove the antenna mount and bring it here? I can't remove the mount without tools, and we don't have time for that. But David paused, thinking quickly. The aircraft's portable radio equipment. The handheld radios that the crew uses have small antennas that can be modified to create a directional electromagnetic pulse. Jennifer quickly retrieved 2 portable radios from the crew emergency kit. David immediately began modifying them, removing the back panels and exposing the internal circuitry. I need something metallic to create a resonance chamber, David said. Aluminum foil, metal utensils, anything that can focus the electromagnetic energy. Sarah grabbed several metal serving trays from the galley and arranged them around the bomb to create a reflective surface that would concentrate any electromagnetic energy David's modified radio could produce. 8 minutes, 44 seconds. David finished his modifications and held up the altered radio. This is completely theoretical, he admitted. I have no idea if it will work, and if it doesn't work perfectly, we're all dead. If we do nothing, we're all dead anyway, Sarah pointed out. Go ahead. David positioned the modified radio antenna about 2 feet from the bomb timer and activated the electromagnetic pulse. There was a brief crackling sound, and the lights in the galley flickered momentarily. The bomb timer continued counting down. 8 minutes, 31 seconds. It didn't work, Jennifer said, her voice cracking with despair. But Sarah was studying the timer display more carefully. Wait, look at the seconds. They watched the display. 8 minutes, 31 seconds. Still 8 minutes, 31 seconds. The timer had frozen. It worked, David exclaimed. The electromagnetic pulse scrambled the timer's clock function. But even as they celebrated this small victory, Sarah noticed something else about the bomb that made her heart sink. There was a second timer, smaller and partially hidden beneath the main housing, that was still counting down. There's a backup timer, she announced grimly. 6 minutes, 12 seconds. The terrorists had been even more thorough than she had realized. They had built redundancy into their redundancy, ensuring that even if the primary timer was disabled, the bomb would still detonate. But this secondary timer appeared to be much simpler than the primary device. It was a basic digital clock connected directly to the detonation system with only 2 wires, positive and negative. No anti-tampering devices, no current sensors, no decoy wires. Sarah pulled a small knife from her belt, a tool she carried as part of her flight attendant emergency equipment, but which had originally been issued to her as part of her military gear. David, if I cut the negative wire on this secondary timer, what happens? David examined the secondary device carefully. It should disable the detonation circuit completely. This timer doesn't have any of the security features of the primary device. But, Sarah, if you're wrong about which wire is negative, or if there are any hidden connections we can't see, I understand the risks. 5 minutes, 43 seconds on the backup timer. Sarah positioned the knife blade against the wire that appeared to carry the negative charge from the secondary timer to the explosive housing. In her mind, she ran through all of her training in explosive ordnance disposal, all of the devices she had successfully disarmed in Afghanistan and Iraq, all of the lives that had been saved because she had been willing to take calculated risks when the alternative was certain death. Everyone moved back to the main cabin, Sarah ordered. If this goes wrong, at least the blast will be somewhat contained in the galley area. I'm not leaving you alone, Jennifer said firmly. We're in this together. David also remained in place. If it goes wrong, a few extra feet won't make any difference. We're at 35,000 feet. Sarah looked at both of them and nodded. Then, with the steadiness that had defined her military career, she pressed the knife blade against the wire and cut through it cleanly. The secondary timer display went dark immediately. For a moment, none of them moved. They stared at the now silent bomb, hardly daring to believe that they had successfully disarmed it. Is it over? Jennifer whispered. Sarah carefully examined both timers and all of the wiring she could see. I think so. Both timers are disabled, and I don't see any other triggering devices. But even as relief began to flood through her system, Sarah realized that their ordeal was far from over. The 3 hijackers were still on board, and, according to what she had overheard, they were part of a larger terrorist operation that included accomplices in Los Angeles. She needed to question the hijackers and find out everything they knew about the broader plot. Lives in Los Angeles might depend on the information these men possessed. Sarah turned to David and Jennifer. I need both of you to help me with something else now. We need to interrogate our prisoners and find out what they know about the rest of their operation. As Flight 847 continued its approach to Nellis Air Force Base, now escorted by 4 F-16 fighters, Sarah prepared to use skills from a different part of her military training. Skills and intelligence gathering that she had hoped never to need again. But as she looked at the 3 restrained terrorists and thought about the innocent people in Los Angeles who might be in danger, Sarah Martinez realized that leaving the SEALs had never really been an option. She could change her job, her location, even her identity, but she could never change who she really was. And who she was at her core was someone who protected innocent people from those who wanted to harm them. Whether she wore a military uniform or a flight attendant's outfit didn't matter. The mission remained the same. The 3 hijackers were secured in first-class seats, using plastic restraint from the aircraft's emergency kit. Dr. Williams had determined that all 3 men were conscious and physically capable of answering questions, though the one who had struck his head on the galley counter had a significant concussion and was drifting in and out of awareness. Sarah knelt beside the leader, the man who had first brandished the knife, and attempted to take control of the aircraft. His dark eyes glared at her with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. He had seen her disarm his carefully planned bomb, and he understood that she was far more than she appeared to be. "What's your name?" Sarah asked in fluent Arabic, catching the man off guard. He responded reflexively in the same language before catching himself. "Ahmed al-Mansouri. And you are not who you pretend to be." "Neither are you," Sarah replied, switching back to English. "You're not a suicide bomber. Suicide bombers don't carry backup identification and emergency cash. You were planning to escape after the bombing." Ahmed's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sarah had found fake passports and nearly $10,000 in cash distributed among the 3 men, along with what appeared to be detailed maps of Los Angeles International Airport and several buildings in downtown Los Angeles. This wasn't a simple terrorist attack. It was part of a coordinated operation with multiple targets and escape routes planned in advance. The bomb was set to detonate over Los Angeles, Sarah continued. But not just anywhere in Los Angeles. You had specific coordinates programmed into the device. You were planning to crash this aircraft into a particular target, weren't you? Ahmed remained silent, but Sarah caught him glancing toward the maps they had found in his jacket. She spread them out on the tray table in front of him and studied them carefully. The maps showed detailed layouts of 3 locations: Los Angeles International Airport, the Federal Building in downtown LA, and what appeared to be a large convention center. Each location was marked with times, entry points, and what looked like security information. 3 targets, Sarah mused. 3 teams. You weren't the only attack planned for today, were you? This time Ahmed's eyes widened slightly before he could control his expression. Sarah had hit upon something significant. "Jennifer," Sarah called out, "ask Captain Rodriguez to contact the FBI immediately. Tell them we have evidence of multiple coordinated terrorist attacks planned for Los Angeles today." While Jennifer relayed this message to the cockpit, Sarah turned her attention to the second hijacker, the one who was most alert despite his head injury. Unlike Ahmed, this man appeared younger and more nervous. Sarah sensed he might be more willing to talk. "What's your name?" she asked him. "I will tell you nothing," he replied in heavily accented English. Sarah sat down in the seat across the aisle from him and adopted a conversational tone. "Let me tell you what I think happened today. You and your friends were recruited for what you thought was a martyrdom operation. Someone told you that dying for the cause would guarantee you a place in paradise. But Ahmed over there, he wasn't planning to die. He has escape money and fake identification. He was planning to parachute out of this aircraft before the bomb detonated, leaving you and your friend here to die while he escaped to carry out additional attacks." The young man's eyes darted toward Ahmed, uncertainty flickering across his features. "Look at his documentation," Sarah continued, showing him the fake passport and cash. "Did you know he had these? Did you know he was planning to survive while you died?" "Shut up," Ahmed snapped in Arabic. "Don't listen to her lies." But Sarah could see that doubt had been planted in the young man's mind. She pressed her advantage. "What's your real name? Not the name on your fake passport. Your real name." "Khalil," the young man said quietly. "Khalil Rashid." "How old are you, Khalil?" 22. "Do you have family back home? Brothers, sisters, parents who are proud of you?" Khalil nodded reluctantly. "They sent you here to die, Khalil." But Ahmed was never supposed to die. Ahmed is valuable to their organization, so they gave him an escape plan. You were expendable to them, just a tool to be used and discarded. "That's not true," Khalil protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah showed him Ahmed's equipment again. "Then, why does Ahmed have parachute deployment instructions in his jacket? Why does he have maps showing emergency landing sites in the California desert?" Khalil looked at Ahmed with growing horror as he realized the implications of what Sarah was showing him. "You were going to jump," Khalil said to Ahmed in Arabic. "You were going to let us die while you escape." Ahmed's response was harsh and rapid, but Sarah caught enough to understand that he was ordering Khalil to remain silent and accusing him of being weak and faithless. "Khalil," Sarah said gently, "there are innocent people in Los Angeles who are going to die today if you don't help me. Children, families, people who have nothing to do with any political conflict. Is that really what you want?" Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Nellis Air Force Base. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are in the upright position. Flight attendants, prepare for emergency landing procedures." Through the aircraft windows, Sarah could see the Nevada desert stretching endlessly in all directions, punctuated by the geometric lines of the Air Force Base's runways. Fighter jets were visible in formation around their aircraft, and she could see emergency vehicles already positioned along the runway. But time was running out for the potential victims in Los Angeles. If there really were coordinated attacks planned, and if the other terrorist teams were operating on the same timeline as Ahmed's group, then people were already dying or about to die. "Khalil, I need you to tell me about the other teams. How many people are involved in today's operation?" Khalil looked back and forth between Sarah and Ahmed, conflict evident on his young face. Finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. 6 teams, 6 different targets. We were supposed to be the opening attack, the one that would draw attention away from the others. What are the other targets? LAX Airport, the Federal Building, the Convention Center where there's a technology conference today, a shopping mall, and Khalil hesitated. And what? A elementary school. Sarah felt her blood run cold. A elementary school. These monsters were planning to attack children. Which school? What's the name? Riverside Elementary. It's near downtown. They chose it because it has over 800 students, and they're having some kind of special event today that brings in parents and visitors. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. 6 coordinated attacks, with targets chosen specifically to maximize casualties and psychological impact. The attack on Flight 847 was meant to be a distraction, drawing law enforcement and emergency resources away from the other locations. When are the other attacks supposed to happen? Noon, Khalil whispered. They're all supposed to happen at noon Pacific time. Sarah looked at her watch. It was 11:23 a.m. Pacific time, less than 40 minutes before the other attacks were scheduled to begin. She immediately called Captain Rodriguez on the cockpit phone. Captain, I have urgent information that needs to be relayed to the FBI immediately. There are 5 additional terrorist attacks planned for Los Angeles today, beginning at noon Pacific time. The targets are LAX Airport, the Federal Building, a convention center hosting a technology conference, an unspecified shopping mall, and Riverside Elementary School. Copy that, Sarah. I'm relaying this information to air traffic control right now. They'll patch it through to federal law enforcement. As Flight 847 began its final approach to Nellis Air Force Base, Sarah continued her interrogation of Khalil, gathering as much detail as possible about the terrorist network and their plans. She learned that the 6 teams had been recruited and trained separately, with only the team leaders knowing the full scope of the operation. Who's your contact in Los Angeles? Sarah asked. Someone must be coordinating the timing of these attacks. Khalil glanced nervously at Ahmed, who was glaring at him with pure hatred. I only know his code name. We were supposed to call him the engineer when we reached Los Angeles. Do you have a phone number for him? Khalil nodded toward his jacket pocket. In my phone. But it's probably a temporary number that he'll discard after today. Sarah found Khalil's phone and scrolled through the contact list. There were only a few numbers stored, all with code names rather than real names. The engineer, the financier, the quartermaster, and several others. But as Sarah examined the phone more carefully, she noticed that it had received several text messages that morning, all from the engineer. The messages were in Arabic, but they appear to contain status updates and timing confirmations for the various attack teams. More importantly, the phone's GPS function was still active, and Sarah could see that it had tracked their movements from Denver International Airport to their current position over Nevada. If the other terrorist teams were using similar phones, law enforcement might be able to track their locations in real time. Jennifer, I need you to give this phone to the FBI the moment we land. The GPS tracking data might help them locate the other terrorist teams before they can carry out their attacks. The aircraft touched down at Nellis Air Force Base with a gentle bump, and Sarah could see dozens of emergency vehicles racing toward their position. FBI agents, bomb squad technicians, paramedics, and Air Force security personnel were all converging on Flight 847. But even as relief flooded through her system at their safe landing, Sarah knew that the day's events were far from over. 5 terrorist teams were still at large in Los Angeles, planning to attack innocent civilians in less than 30 minutes. As the aircraft came to a stop and the emergency crews surrounded it, Sarah realized that her role in this crisis was just beginning. The FBI would want to debrief her extensively about what she had learned from the hijackers, but more importantly, they might need her operational expertise to help stop the remaining attacks. The aircraft door opened and FBI agents boarded immediately, followed by bomb squad technicians who went straight to the disabled explosive device in the overhead compartment. Sarah found herself face-to-face with a tall woman in a dark suit who displayed FBI credentials. Agent Patricia Walsh, FBI Counterterrorism Division. Are you the flight attendant who disarmed the bomb and captured the hijackers? Yes, ma'am. Sarah Martinez. But, Agent Walsh, there are 5 additional attacks planned in Los Angeles in the next 25 minutes. I have detailed information about the targets and possibly some way to track the terrorist locations. Agent Walsh's expression became even more serious. We're already mobilizing response teams based on the information Captain Rodriguez relayed. But we're going to need you to tell us everything you learned from these prisoners. Sarah handed over Khalil's phone and the maps they had found on Ahmed. This phone has GPS tracking data and text messages from their coordinator. The young one, Khalil, has been cooperating. He says there are 6 teams total, with attacks scheduled for noon Pacific time. Agent Walsh examined the phone and maps quickly, then spoke into a radio headset. Los Angeles Command, this is Walsh at Nellis. We have confirmation of 6-team operation, noon Pacific time execution. Targets confirmed as LAX, Federal Building, Tech Convention Center, Shopping Mall location unknown, and Riverside Elementary School. I'm transmitting GPS and communications data now. Agent Walsh, Sarah said, I have extensive counterterrorism experience from my military service. If you need operational assistance with the response in Los Angeles, I'm available. Agent Walsh looked at Sarah with new interest. What kind of military experience? 8 years Navy SEALs. Explosive ordnance disposal. Intelligence gathering, counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. SEALs? Agent Walsh's eyebrows rose. We could definitely use your expertise. How quickly can you get to Los Angeles? Sarah looked back at the aircraft where Jennifer and the passengers were being evacuated and at the 3 restrained terrorists who were about to be taken into FBI custody. She thought about Khalil's frightened confession about Riverside Elementary School and the 800 children who might be in danger. I can be ready to go in 5 minutes, Sarah said. Agent Walsh smiled grimly. We have a helicopter standing by to take you to a military transport aircraft. You'll be in Los Angeles in 40 minutes. As Sarah gathered her few personal belongings and prepared to leave Flight 847, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in the space of a few hours. This morning she had been Sarah Martinez, flight attendant, trying to put her military past behind her and live a normal civilian life. Now she was about to become Commander Sarah Martinez again, racing against time to help stop one of the most ambitious terrorist attacks ever attempted on American soil. But as she climbed into the waiting helicopter and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, Sarah realized that this was who she had always been meant to be. The flight attendant uniform had been the disguise. This was her true calling. The military transport aircraft that carried Sarah from Nevada to Los Angeles was equipped with a mobile command center, complete with satellite communications, real-time intelligence feeds, and direct links to the FBI's counterterrorism operations in the city. As they flew southwest at maximum speed, Sarah worked alongside Agent Walsh and a team of federal agents to coordinate the response to the unfolding crisis. Status report from Los Angeles. Agent Walsh announced, reading from a secure tablet. 2 of the terrorist teams have been located and apprehended based on the GPS data from the hijacker's phone. 1 team was arrested at LAX before they could reach their target, and another team was taken down outside the federal building. Sarah felt a surge of relief, but she knew they weren't finished yet. What about the other 3 teams? Still unaccounted for. The team targeting the technology convention has gone dark. Their phones are either destroyed or turned off. Same with the shopping mall team. But we have good news about Riverside Elementary. Agent Walsh showed Sarah a live video feed from a drone circling above the school. LAPD evacuated the entire school as soon as we provided the intelligence. 837 children and staff members were relocated to a secure facility 2 miles away. Even if the terrorists reach the school, they'll find it empty. Sarah studied the drone footage carefully. Riverside Elementary was a large, modern facility with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. The school's playground and parking areas were completely deserted, but she could see unmarked police vehicles positioned at strategic points around the perimeter. It looks like LAPD is setting up an ambush, Sarah observed. Exactly. If the terrorists show up, they'll be walking into a trap. But, Sarah, we need your opinion on something. Agent Walsh pulled up another screen showing intercepted communications from the terrorist coordination network. The messages were in Arabic, and Sarah's translation skills were needed to understand their full implications. The engineer is getting suspicious, Sarah said, after reading through the messages. He knows that Ahmed's team failed because they missed their scheduled check-in time. He's starting to wonder if the operation has been compromised. What does that mean for the remaining attacks? Sarah continued reading the intercepted text messages, her expression growing more concerned. He's moving up the timeline. Instead of waiting until noon, he's ordering the remaining teams to execute immediately. And he's changing some of the targets. Change to what? I'm not sure. He's using code words that aren't in the previous messages. References to the primary objective and maximum symbolic impact. Agent Walsh was already relaying this information to the tactical teams in Los Angeles when an urgent voice came over the radio from a field. Command, this is LAPD Team 7 at the convention center. We have eyes on 3 suspects matching the terrorist profile. They're approaching the building from the south entrance, but something's wrong. They're not carrying any visible weapons or explosives. Sarah grabbed the radio microphone. Team 7, this is Commander Martinez. Can you describe what the suspects are carrying? Each suspect has a small backpack and what appears to be electronic devices, maybe tablets or large phones. They're dressed as convention attendees with identification badges. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. Agent Walsh, they're not suicide bombers. They're reconnaissance scouts. What do you mean? The real attack isn't at the convention center. These 3 are gathering intelligence on law enforcement response patterns and positions. While we're focused on them, the actual attack team is hitting a different target. Sarah quickly analyzed the tactical situation. If the terrorists were using decoy teams to distract law enforcement, then they had planned for the possibility that their operation might be partially compromised. The engineer was more sophisticated than they had initially realized. We need to find out what the primary objective really is, Sarah said. Agent Walsh, can your technical team track the source of the engineer's text messages? If we can locate him, we can find out what he's really planning. Already working on it. NSA is trying to triangulate his signal, but he's using encrypted communications and probably moving between different transmission points. The aircraft was approaching Los Angeles now, and Sarah could see the sprawling city stretching out below them. Somewhere in that maze of buildings and highways, terrorist teams were preparing to strike at innocent civilians. But instead of the 6 coordinated attacks they had originally planned to prevent, they now faced an unknown number of targets and an enemy who was adapting his strategy in real time. Commander Martinez, Agent Walsh said, we're going to land at LAX in 5 minutes. I want you to take command of one of our tactical response teams. Your counterterrorism experience makes you the best qualified person we have to deal with this situation. Sarah nodded, but her mind was racing through the tactical possibilities. If she were planning a terrorist operation and wanted maximum symbolic impact, what would she target in Los Angeles? Agent Walsh, show me a map of potential high-value targets in the LA area. Government buildings, infrastructure, symbolic locations. Walsh pulled up a digital map on her tablet, marking dozens of potential targets throughout the metropolitan area. Sarah studied them carefully, looking for the one location that would provide the maximum psychological impact for a terrorist attack. There, she said, pointing to a location in downtown Los Angeles. City Hall. It's the symbolic center of the city's government. It's accessible from multiple directions, and if they attack it during business hours, they could kill hundreds of government employees and civilians. But we would have heard about an attack on City Hall by now. It's one of the most heavily secured buildings in the city. Sarah continued studying the map, looking for other possibilities. Then, something caught her attention, a notation about a special event scheduled for that day. Agent Walsh, what's this notation about a ceremony at the LA Memorial Coliseum today? Walsh checked her intelligence briefings. There's a dedication ceremony for a new veterans memorial. It's being attended by several hundred military families, local politicians, and veteran organizations. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at noon. Sarah felt her heart stop. A veterans memorial dedication ceremony, attended by hundreds of military families and their children. For terrorists motivated by anti-American ideology, it would be the perfect symbolic target. That's it, Sarah said. That's the primary objective. They're going to attack the memorial ceremony. But the ceremony was postponed when we issued the general terrorism alert this morning. The mayor's office moved it to next week as a security precaution. Sarah was already reaching for the radio to contact the tactical teams. Agent Walsh, what if the terrorists don't know the ceremony was postponed? What if they're proceeding with the original plan? Before Agent Walsh could respond, an urgent transmission came over the radio from LAPD units in the field. All units, we have reports of an explosion at the LA Memorial Coliseum. Repeat, explosion at the Memorial Coliseum. Multiple casualties reported. Sarah grabbed her gear and prepared to disembark as their aircraft touched down at LAX. How far is the Coliseum from here? 12 miles through city traffic, Agent Walsh replied. But we have helicopters standing by. As they transferred to a waiting helicopter, Sarah could see a column of dark smoke rising from the direction of downtown Los Angeles. The terrorists had carried out at least part of their plan, despite all their efforts to prevent it. But as the helicopter lifted off and raced toward the Coliseum, Sarah realized that the explosion might not have been the end of the attack. It might have been just the beginning. If the terrorists were sophisticated enough to plan decoy operations and adapt their strategy when compromised, they might have anticipated that law enforcement would converge on the site of the first explosion. Agent Walsh, Sarah said over the helicopter's intercom system, what if the explosion at the Coliseum is meant to draw all of our resources to one location? What if they're planning a secondary attack somewhere else? Where else would they hit? Sarah thought about the terrorist mindset, about the symbolic targets that would matter most to an organization trying to make a statement about American power and influence. The airport, she said, lacks. While every law enforcement officer in the city is responding to the Coliseum explosion, a small team could penetrate airport security and take control of multiple aircraft. They could crash planes into buildings throughout the city or use them to attack other targets. Agent Walsh immediately got on the radio to LAX security, ordering them to implement maximum alert procedures and ground all departing flights. But Sarah knew that if the terrorists were already inside the airport perimeter, it might be too late to stop them. As their helicopter approached the Coliseum, Sarah could see the full scope of the destruction below. The explosion had occurred in the parking area rather than at the memorial site itself, which explained why the casualties were not as severe as they could have been. Emergency vehicles surrounded the area, and she could see FBI and LAPD teams establishing a perimeter. But something about the scene bothered her. The explosion appeared to be relatively small, more like a car bomb than the type of major attack she would have expected from terrorists with access to military-grade explosives like the bomb they had found on Flight 847. Agent Walsh, that explosion was meant to be a distraction. I'm sure of it now. The real attack is happening somewhere else. Their helicopter was circling the Coliseum when Agent Walsh's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from LAX. Federal Command, this is LAX Security. We have reports of armed suspects in Terminal 4. Shots fired near the departure gates. We're implementing lockdown procedures now. Sarah felt her heart racing as the pieces of the terrorist plan finally fell into place. The attack on Flight 847 was meant to draw attention away from Los Angeles. The explosion at the Coliseum was meant to draw law enforcement resources away from the airport. And now, while every available officer was responding to the bombing, the real terrorist team was taking control of LAX. Get us to the airport, Sarah told the helicopter pilot. Maximum speed. As they raced across the Los Angeles basin toward LAX, Sarah began mentally preparing for what might be the most challenging operation of her career. She was about to walk into an active terrorist attack with minimal backup, limited intelligence, and no clear idea of how many enemies she would be facing. But 8 years as a Navy SEAL had taught her to thrive in exactly these kinds of impossible situations. And as she checked her equipment and prepared for combat, Sarah Martinez felt the familiar calm that came over her whenever she was about to put her life on the line to protect innocent people. The airport was getting closer, and somewhere inside those terminals, terrorists were threatening the lives of thousands of travelers. It was time for the flight attendant to disappear completely, and for Commander Martinez to take full control of the situation. The helicopter touched down on a secure area of the LAX tarmac, where FBI tactical teams were already assembling. As Sarah disembarked, she was met by Agent Michael Torres, the FBI's on-scene commander for the airport crisis. "Commander Martinez, glad you're here. We have a complex situation developing inside Terminal 4. At least 6 armed suspects have taken control of the departure area, and they're holding approximately 300 passengers and airport personnel as hostages." Sarah quickly assessed the tactical display that Agent Torres showed her on a tablet computer. Terminal 4 was one of LAX's busiest sections, with multiple departure gates, restaurants, shops, and security checkpoints. The terrorists had positioned themselves strategically to control all the main corridors and exits. What do we know about their weapons and capabilities? Initial reports suggest they have assault rifles and possibly explosives. Airport security cameras show them wearing what appear to be suicide vests, but we haven't been able to confirm whether those are real or decoys. Sarah studied the terminal layout more carefully. Have they made any demands? That's the strange part. No demands, no communication at all. They took control of the terminal 20 minutes ago, but they haven't tried to contact authorities or negotiate for anything. This information troubled Sarah deeply. Terrorists who took hostages usually wanted something: the release of prisoners, political concessions, or at minimum a platform to broadcast their message to the world. Terrorists who took hostages without making demands were usually planning something much worse. Agent Torres, I think they're preparing for a mass casualty event. They're not planning to negotiate, they're planning to kill everyone in that terminal. What makes you think that? The pattern fits with everything we've learned about this organization today. They're not interested in traditional terrorism tactics. They want maximum body count and symbolic impact. Sarah's radio crackled with an update from the teams at the Coliseum. "Federal Command, this is Coliseum Command. The bombing here was definitely a diversionary attack. Small device, minimal casualties, but it drew significant law enforcement resources. We're redeploying teams to LAX now." "Understood, Coliseum Command," Agent Torres replied. "But we can't wait for additional backup. If Commander Martinez is right about the terrorist intentions, we need to act immediately." Sarah examined the terminal blueprints and security camera feeds more carefully, looking for potential entry points and tactical approaches. The terrorists had chosen their position well. They controlled the main security checkpoint, which meant that any rescue attempt would have to come through areas where they would have clear lines of sight. "Agent Torres, do we have access to the terminal's maintenance areas? Service tunnels, utility corridors, anything that might allow us to approach without being detected?" Airport maintenance says there are service tunnels that run beneath the entire terminal complex. They're used for electrical, plumbing, and ventilation systems. But, Commander, those tunnels are barely large enough for one person to crawl through. That might be exactly what we need. Sarah's military experience had taught her that sometimes the most effective approach to a heavily defended position was the one that seemed impossible. If the terrorists were watching all the obvious entry points, then the obvious entry points were exactly where they shouldn't go. I need detailed blueprints of those service tunnels, and I need them now. While airport maintenance provided the technical drawings, Sarah assembled a small team of FBI agents with military backgrounds. She explained her plan. A small infiltration team would use the service tunnels to access the terminal from below, while the main tactical force created a visible presence at the primary entrances to draw the terrorists' attention. The key to this operation is coordination, Sarah explained to the assembled team. The terrorists are expecting us to come through the main entrances, and they're prepared for that. But they won't be expecting an attack from below. Agent Torres was reviewing the plan when an urgent transmission came from inside the terminal. Federal Command, this is Airport Security Officer Janet Phillips. I'm hiding in a storage closet near Gate 47. The terrorists have started separating the hostages into different groups. They're taking all the children and elderly people to one area and moving the adults to another section. Sarah's heart sank as she realized what this meant. They're segregating the hostages to maximize the psychological impact when they start killing people. Children and elderly victims first to create maximum terror. Commander, how long do you think we have? Sarah looked at her watch. It was 12:47 p.m. Pacific time. The original attack schedule had called for all operations to be completed by noon, which meant the terrorists were already behind their planned timeline. Not long. If they're operating on a tight schedule, they'll start the executions soon to make up for lost time. Sarah made a command decision. Agent Torres, initiate the diversionary assault on the main entrances in 15 minutes. I'm going into the service tunnels now with a 2-person team. When you hear explosions or gunfire from inside the terminal, that's your signal to begin the primary assault. Agent Torres selected 2 agents with Special Forces backgrounds, Agent Davis, a former Army Ranger, and Agent Kim, who had served with Marine Force Reconnaissance. Both agents were experienced in close-quarters combat and hostage rescue operations. The service tunnel entrance was located in the basement of an adjacent terminal building. Sarah and her team crawled through a narrow opening that led into a maze of pipes, electrical conduits, and ventilation ducts. The tunnel was barely 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, forcing them to move in a crouched position while carrying their weapons and equipment. Commander, Agent Davis whispered as they navigated through the cramped space. How are we going to know where we are in relation to the hostages? Sarah had studied the terminal blueprints carefully before entering the tunnels. The main hostage area should be directly above us when we reach Junction Point 7. There's a maintenance access panel in the ceiling that opens into a storage room adjacent to the departure lounge. They moved through the tunnels as quickly as the confined space would allow, guided by the building plans and occasional sounds from above. Sarah could hear muffled voices, crying children, and what sounded like commands being shouted in Arabic. When they reached Junction Point 7, Sarah carefully examined the access panel above them. It was secured with standard building maintenance locks, which she was able to open quietly using tools from her equipment kit. Agent Kim, give me a boost up to the access panel. I'm going to scout the situation before we commit to this approach. Agent Kim formed a platform with his hands, and Sarah carefully lifted herself up to peer through the access opening. She found herself looking into a small storage room filled with cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. Through a partially open door, she could see into the main departure area where the hostages were being held. What she saw made her blood run cold. The terrorists had divided the hostages into 3 groups, exactly as Officer Phillips had reported. One group consisted of approximately 40 children and elderly passengers who were seated on the floor in the center of the departure lounge. A second group of about 100 adults was positioned near the windows overlooking the tarmac. The third group, smaller but including several airport security officers and airline personnel, was gathered near the gate counters. But what concerned Sarah most was the behavior of the terrorists themselves. Instead of positioning themselves defensively to repel a rescue attempt, they appeared to be preparing for something else entirely. Each terrorist was wearing what looked like an explosive vest, and they were positioning themselves among the different hostage groups. Sarah realized with horror that the terrorists weren't planning to hold the hostages for any extended period. They were planning to detonate their explosive vests simultaneously, killing themselves and everyone in the terminal. She quietly lowered herself back down to the tunnel level and reported her observations to Agent Torres via radio. Agent Torres, we have a suicide bombing scenario. 6 terrorists with explosive vests positioned among 3 hostage groups. They're preparing for simultaneous detonation. How much time do we have? I don't know, but based on their positioning and behavior, it could happen at any moment. Agent Torres's voice was grim. Commander, what do you need from us? Sarah thought quickly about the tactical situation. If the terrorists detonated their explosives, there would be no survivors in the departure lounge. Traditional hostage rescue tactics, which relied on negotiation and gradual de-escalation, wouldn't work against suicide bombers. I need you to create the largest possible distraction at the main entrance. Make them think that's where the primary assault is coming from. Draw as many of them as possible away from the hostage groups. And then I'm going to try to take out as many of them as possible before they can trigger their explosives. Sarah knew that what she was proposing was essentially a suicide mission. Even if she managed to neutralize some of the terrorists, the others would certainly detonate their explosives the moment they realized they were under attack. But it was the only chance the hostages had. Agents Davis and Kim, I want you to remain in the tunnels and provide backup support. If this goes wrong, you'll be the only chance for any survivors. Commander, we should all go in together, Agent Davis protested. Negative. 3 people moving through that terminal will be detected immediately. 1 person might be able to get close enough to make a difference. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Sidearm, backup weapon, flashbang grenades, and the small explosive charges she carried for breaching operations. It wasn't much firepower against 6 heavily armed suicide bombers, but it would have to be enough. She climbed back up through the access panel and moved carefully through the storage room toward the partially open door. From this position, she could see the entire departure lounge and plan her approach. The terrorist leader was standing near the children's group, speaking rapidly into a cell phone in Arabic. Sarah caught fragments of his conversation. He was receiving final authorization from the engineer to proceed with the attack. Agent Torres, Sarah whispered into her radio, begin the diversionary assault now. I'm going in. The sound of flashbang grenades and automatic weapons fire erupted from the main entrance to Terminal 4 as planned. Several of the terrorists immediately moved toward the sound of the gunfire, leaving only 3 to guard the hostage groups. Sarah took a deep breath, said a silent prayer for the innocent people she was about to try to save, and stepped out of the storage room into the departure lounge. The first terrorist never saw her coming. Sarah approached him from behind while he was focused on the gunfire at the main entrance, and neutralized him with a single shot to the head before he could reach for his explosive trigger. The second terrorist, who was guarding the adult hostage group, spun around at the sound of the gunshot and raised his assault rifle toward Sarah. But she was already moving, diving behind a row of departure gate seating while pulling the pin on a flashbang grenade. The explosion of light and sound temporarily blinded and deafened everyone in the departure lounge, including Sarah herself. But her military training had prepared her for this moment. Even while her vision was still impaired, she moved toward the approximate position of the second terrorist and fired multiple shots in his direction. When her sight began to clear, Sarah saw that the second terrorist was down, but the remaining 4 had regrouped and were now advancing toward the hostage groups with their fingers on their explosive triggers. Sarah realized that she had perhaps 10 seconds before the suicide bombers would detonate their devices and kill everyone in the terminal, including herself. But as she prepared for what might be her final action, the sound of additional gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Agent Davis and Agent Kim had disobeyed her orders and entered the terminal through different access points, creating a crossfire that caught the remaining terrorists by surprise. In the chaos that followed, Sarah and her team were able to neutralize the remaining suicide bombers before they could detonate their explosives. The entire engagement lasted less than 90 seconds, but those 90 seconds had saved the lives of nearly 300 innocent people. As FBI tactical teams swarmed into the terminal and began evacuating the hostages, Sarah sat down heavily in one of the departure gate chairs and tried to process what had just happened. Agent Torres approached her with a grim smile. "Commander Martinez, I think you should know that we've just received word from the other attack sites. The teams at the shopping mall and convention center have been apprehended. The terrorist network has been completely dismantled." Sarah nodded, but she was thinking about something else entirely. "Agent Torres, we need to find an engineer. The person who coordinated this entire operation is still out there, and he'll try again. Already working on it." NSA was able to trace his communications to a location in downtown Los Angeles. LAPD is moving on his position now. As Sarah stood up and prepared to leave Terminal 4, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 12 hours ago, she had been Sarah Martinez, flight attendant, living a quiet life and trying to forget her military past. Now, as emergency medical teams treated the few casualties from the terminal assault and hundreds of grateful passengers were reunited with their families, Sarah realized that she could never really leave her past behind. The skills and training that had defined her military career would always be a part of who she was. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe the world needed people who were willing to put their lives on the line to protect innocent civilians from those who wanted to harm them. As Sarah walked out of Terminal 4 and into the bright California sunshine, she made a decision about her future. She would continue working as a flight attendant because she loved the job and the opportunity it gave her to help people every day. But she would also make herself available to law enforcement whenever they needed someone with her particular set of skills. Because sometimes the most effective defense against terrorism came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it came from a flight attendant who was much more than she appeared to be. Agent Walsh met Sarah outside the terminal with news that the engineer had been captured without incident, along with computers and communications equipment that would help authorities track down any remaining members of the terrorist network. "Commander Martinez," Agent Walsh said, "the FBI would like to offer you a permanent position with our counterterrorism division. Your actions today probably saved over 1,000 lives." Sarah considered the offer for a moment, then shook her head with a smile. "Thank you, Agent Walsh, but I already have a job. I'm a flight attendant. But if you ever need my help again, you know how to reach me." As Sarah walked toward the taxi that would take her back to her hotel, she thought about Flight 847 and the ordinary Tuesday morning that had turned into something extraordinary. She thought about Jennifer, who had shown incredible bravery under pressure. She thought about David Shun, the Boeing engineer who had helped save everyone's lives with his technical expertise. Most of all, she thought about the 186 passengers on Flight 847 who had trusted her to keep them safe, and the 300 hostages in Terminal 4 who had depended on her to rescue them from an impossible situation. Sarah Martinez, flight attendant and former Navy SEAL commander, had kept that trust, and she would be ready to do so again whenever duty called. The taxi pulled away from LAX as the sun began to set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. It had been a long day, but it was finally over. For now.